Hello, and we're back with a brand new episode on Care Life Podcast. My name is Kenzie Rock, and this is our 12 days of Christmas holiday special. I've actually forgotten what day it is today, but that's life. So before we begin, as our normal ritual and custom, please remember to follow all our social media platforms on KR Life Podcast. That's the title for our social media platform. Or Phyllis McKenzie, the link will be in the description down below. We also have a YouTube channel, KR Life Podcast. Subscribe to it. You can also use that place as a form of giving us comments if you can give us reviews from wherever you're listening from. Anyways, today's guest, ladies and gentlemen, he's a retired orthopedic surgeon. If you don't know what that is, he's a bone surgeon and a lifelong bone lover. Currently, he is a clinical professor of the orthopedic surgery at UCLA. I don't know why, but actually I have a very big urge to do the 8 clap. Okay, we just have to do it. We have to. Okay, so if any person listening right now, you have graduated or you're on your way to graduating or you are studying in UCLA, get your feet up because we are actually going to do the Bruins 8 Club. Of all universities, that is the best cheer club I've ever heard, I've ever seen, I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing. Okay, so get up, get up, get up, get up, because we are about to start. Hands in the air, hands in the air. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, U, C, L-A. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. Okay, I had to do it. So with that, presenting our guest today is Dr. Roy Mills. Welcome to Care Life Podcast.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
We're so happy to have a doctor this season's episode, and I know we have a lot of questions, but before we begin with the series of questions, could you please tell us your story? Who are you besides being a doctor?
Okay. Well, I grew up in Kansas City in the very middle part of the United States, and spent summers outside and enjoyed watching birds and collecting insects and feeding snakes and so forth. And then the winters were cold, and so I spent them in our basement. We had a woodworking shop, and I enjoyed building things and taking things apart. And so I guess when I went to college, it wasn't any surprise that I became a biology major and then decided to go to medical school. And that with my experience of using tools is that becoming an orthopedic surgeon was an interesting goal of mine. And somewhere during orthopedic surgery residency, I learned about the subspecialty of hand surgery and was drawn to it because of both the functional aspects and the emotional and cosmetic aspects of the hand. I mean, after our faces, our hand is really who we are. And so then I've spent my career at UCLA on the faculty teaching as well as practicing hand surgery and doing research. And so that the interest in bones really has been lifelong and, evolved slowly.
So, Dr. Roy, you are an orthopedic surgeon, which is basically a bone doctor, right?
That's right.
So what do you basically do as a bone surgeon?
Well, I subspecialized in hand surgery, so I take care of problems from the elbow out to the fingertips. And a lot of that is trauma, industrial accidents, automobile accidents, sports injuries, but also really runs the gamut from taking care of very small infants to people well over 100 years old. That's one of the fun things about it. And then the other thing is that we take care of a variety of problems, arthritis and trauma, tumors, infections, really the whole gamut of disease types. And so that has really kept the career interesting for me.
Roy, being a doctor, it's evident that it's the most stressful type of job on this planet because you have to be careful, and this is a human person, a literal living person you're working on. So what is one thing you wish you would have known before you became a doctor?
That's a good question, and there were no doctors in my family. I had no immediate role models in my family, and I think I was mainly attracted to medicine just because of my interest in science and into life sciences. and that I knew that a career in medicine would be forever challenging. It wouldn't be that I'd ever get bored with it, and that's certainly been the case. To answer your question, I really don't know. I don't know whether it's the most stressful job in the world. I think being an airline pilot would be very stressful. I mean, in terms of having the care and lives of hundreds of people in your hands at one time. There are a lot of stressful jobs, but that part of the training that goes into being a surgeon or being an airline pilot is, the training and experience and the discipline and following the routines in terms of checklists and so forth to be very careful about not making mistakes. And had I to do it all over again, I would choose exactly the same career. It's been a wonderful career for me.
So you've been a doctor for a long time, right?
Yes. I graduated from medical school in 1971, so that's 49 years.
Yeah, that's a very long time. And what are some of the great resources that have helped you along the way?
I'm sorry, tell me again.
What are some of the great resources that have helped you along the way?
Oh, I've had great role models in terms of residents a year or two ahead of me in the residency training program. They always have the best information about, how to get things done. And since they learned it just recently, is that they can still remember how they made the process from getting from A to D by going through B and C. And then, I've had fantastic teachers, just really wonderful teachers that loved to learn and loved to teach, and that were able to pass that on. I'm forever grateful to some spectacular teachers, and that I have tried to pass that on and tried to be the very best teacher I could and make learning fun.
Speaking of residents, I've always had this question, and I've always wondered, are all types of doctors put in one hospital and work together as residents? Let's say you're a pediatrician and now an orthopedic surgeon and another is a family doctor. Are all residents grouped together in a hospital and just told to work and figure themselves out, or is there a process where you're branched into your respective departments?
Well, I mean, a general hospital would certainly have, various departments: orthopedic surgery, internal medicine, neurosurgery, pediatrics, and so forth. And so that in a general hospital there would be trainees as well as faculty members of all disciplines. Now, there are some specialty hospitals. There are a few orthopedic hospitals, so that most everybody on the staff would be orthopedic. But if they had a particular problem with a pediatric patient or with a cardiac patient, well, then a specialist would come to the hospital to see that patient. But most hospitals have a wide spectrum of specialties and specialists.
That's great to know. I've always wondered what happens around the hospital when all interns and residents and doctors are there. Now, I didn't know if people are grouped into respective departments or you're just kept in one big general hospital and then you figure yourself out as you're learning. But anyways...
we have to rely on each other. I mean, nobody can know everything. And so that I would hope that the pediatricians would call the orthopedic surgeon if they have a problem with a musculoskeletal type of disease, and that I would certainly call on the cardiologist if I had a patient who, was having heart complaints. And so, yeah, it's a big team.
Oh, that's great. And 47 years is a lot of time being a doctor, and you still have a passion for it. So have you had a big failure or even a minor failure with one of your patients, and what did you learn from it?
Yes, failures are inevitable. In hand surgery, we don't normally deal with life and death issues. We mainly deal with quality of life issues, but that forever embedded on my mind are 4 or 5 patients during my career who died while they were in the hospital, and really their problem that brought them to the hospital was what was their hand condition, but then of course they died for some other reason. And I think that the lesson I learned from that is that we can't focus on just this hand fracture or this thumb arthritis, but that these problems are attached to real patients and real people, who have lives, and that the goal of treatment is not to treat the thumb or not to treat the fracture, but to treat the whole patient and get them back in the mainstream of life. I think sometimes during residency training is that people are the residents are a little bit overwhelmed from time to time, and that they tend to compartmentalize things and say, well, I have a wrist fracture to take care of tomorrow. And I say, no, that's not a wrist fracture. That's a patient. That's a living human being that has a name and has a family and has concerns. And they happen to have a wrist fracture, and you are privileged to be able to take care of that person and manage their wrist fracture.
In regards to that, how do doctors in general deal with losing a patient? Because doctors do tend to get attached to their patients' lives, and you find that a loss to the family is also a loss to the doctor. So how do you doctors cope with this situation and have the strength to keep on moving each and every day?
Well, I can only speak for myself. I mean, I think doctors, the public image it tends that we tend to keep our feelings to ourselves, and that we, like to deal with other people's problems, but tend to not talk too much about our own problems. But that with these patients that died, I certainly talked to my wife about them, and that some of these were 30 or 40 years ago, and I still remember them vividly. I think I'm done processing them, but that they have had a lifelong impression on me, and guided my work in terms of trying to avoid such things in the future. But if you were in cardiology or oncology, is that death is a much more common experience among your patients, and I think sometimes people are attracted to a certain specialty because they can deal with this or they can't deal with this. I suspect that somebody in radiology or pathology, I can't say whether they were attracted to their specialties because of the lack of necessity to cope with these life issue problems, but that would certainly be an avenue for somebody to take if they were interested in life sciences, but that really didn't feel good about dealing with patient death on a regular basis.
Roy, growing up watching shows like Grey's Anatomy, the series, has taught me a lot about hospitals. Some things are maybe like too exaggerated when it comes to Grey's Anatomy, but 99% of the time they say true things that happen in the hospital. And I remember there was a time in Grey's Anatomy where a patient came in with an ailment, and the doctors had never been in that situation before. They had never seen that ailment before, but they made it work, and they managed to at least make the patient feel a little better for a short period of time. So for you personally, have you had a patient who came in with, let's say, a fracture or something in the hand that you never seen before, but you still managed to make it work?
Sure, that happens all the time, and it may not be settling to hear this from a patient's point of view, but that's one of the things that keeps medicine interesting is coming across new things. But that disease, follows into relatively clear-cut patterns, and that's one nice thing with experience is to understand these patterns. And so even if you see a different set of symptoms, is it, well, this fits into a pattern. It's much more like this disease than another process, and so you can learn. I mean, there have been patients in the office, say, with very bad arthritis and multiple deformed joints from rheumatoid arthritis, for instance, and I will examine them and talk to them and say, well, you have a very complex problem, and I need to think about this. I don't know what the answer is. In terms of, should we reconstruct your elbow and then your wrist and then your thumb, or should we do both thumbs at the same time? And says, this is a very complex problem. It's been coming on over a number of years, and that I need to think about this. I need to read a little bit about it. I need to, talk to my colleagues, and will you come back in a week or two, and I'll have a plan. And so I don't think anybody ever didn't come back because they said, well, hell, Dr. Meals didn't know what the answer to that was on a 15-minute visit when I first saw him. But those are challenging problems, and it's good to think about. Now, in emergency cases, oftentimes the decisions have to be made immediately. I'll tell you one interesting story. It was a number of years ago. teenage girl came in the emergency room. I believe it was a Saturday night, but that she'd had her hand out the window of a car, and the car rolled over. So it crushed her hand. It was a terrible injury. And it had some gravel and dirt in this open injury and broken bones. And the resident who was helping me, the first thing we do with a patient like that is to wash all the dirt out. But we have a saline irrigation that we can either use with just an irrigating syringe or maybe with just a drip out of an IV line. And so, you're just turning all these jagged tissues over and scraping dirt off the ends of the bones and cleaning it up. This went on for 20 or 25 minutes, and maybe 15 minutes into it, he said, Dr. Meals, even with my magnifying glasses on my eyes, like you have, I can't see any more dirt. I think this wound is clean, and that we can proceed. And I said, yeah, it is clean. It was clean about 5 minutes ago, but I'm trying to figure out what to do with it. So I was just, making time go by. It wouldn't hurt to clean it up some more, get a few more bacteria out of it, but that I was just turning these broken tissues over and deciding what we could save and what we had to take out and what maybe we could use something in a substitute in a different place and make decisions that were going to affect this patient's life forever on a short basis. There wasn't any time to go to the books or ask my colleagues. It was just a matter of problem solving. And I think that really has been the best part of diagnosis and treatment is taking something on an emergency basis that this particular injury has never occurred in that exact way before, and in 15 or 20 minutes making a plan. It might take 6 or 10 hours after that to execute the plan, and there may be secondary surgeries, but that to make a solid plan that night that will restore the patient to the best function and appearance possible in the fewest number of operations, and ideally get them back into their work and their life in a matter of months, not years. That has been a great game of chess in terms of problem solving like that.
Roy, I'm pretty sure somebody or someone out there might want to ask you, how long does it actually take for one to be a certified doctor or a certified surgeon from college all the way to when you can actually start treating people?
Okay. Well, in the United States, we go to college for 4 years, and then medical school is 4 years. And then orthopedic surgery residency training is 5 years. And then most orthopedic residents these days will take a subspecialty fellowship, and that could be in total joints, could be in pediatric orthopedics, could be in tumors, sports medicine, foot and ankle. I took a year-long subspecialty in hand. And so that although I was licensed by the end of my first year of residency, as far as the state was concerned, I was licensed to, quote, practice medicine. But in terms of actually going out and being on my own and joining the faculty at UCLA, it was 4 + 4 + 5 + 1. So that's 16 years after high school. And if you're a high school student and you're looking up this mountain, it seems like an awfully long time. But that when you're in it and looking back on it, it's very short. And one of the reasons that makes it short while you're in it is that you're actually doing the type of things that you'll be doing for the rest of your life. It's just that you're doing it with supervision. And that if you like it, then the time goes by very fast. And if you don't like it, you better find something else to do because it's going to be a very long, tedious career for you.
And who are 3 people who are most influential to you, Roy? When you're doing this medical practice, who do you sit, close your eyes, and think about each and every moment?
Well, I guess my parents, who gave me the latitude to branch out and do something that nobody else in the family had done before, and they paid for my education through medical school, so I'm very grateful for that. And then the chief of orthopedics during my residency, he was in his 60s and had seen it all and was kind of a grandfather figure to all of us. And then my mentor in hand surgery is that's a fellowship where basically it's a one-on-one relationship for a year, and that you get to know that person very well, and they get to know you very well because you see them, 16 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, and see them in their good mood and in their bad mood and so forth. And so that he was very influential, and we liked each other and enjoyed each other's company, as well as him teaching me an awfully lot. And he might not admit it, but I think I probably taught him some too. And then as a faculty member myself, is that we've had fellows that I've trained, and they've become some of my very best friends because, we are together a lot. We have a common interest in terms of taking the best care we can of hand problems, and they read things that I haven't read, and they've been to other hospitals and training programs that I haven't been to, so they bring new ideas in. And I think that's one of the things I like best about being a teacher is what I learn in the process.
Doctor, you've always been a lifelong bone lover.
Yes.
What are some myths or just one specific myth that you heard about your industry or profession that you want to tell people, stop, this is not true, just go for it?
What, that's not true? I'm sorry.
A myth that's totally not true.
Whoa. Well, a lot of people have some concept that a break and a fracture are different. Because I'll see a patient in the office and I'll say, I put the X-ray up and I'll say, well, you can see here where you have a break in your bone, and their eyes get big and they say, a break? Well, they told me in the emergency room it was just a fracture, Or I can say the other thing. I'll put an X-ray up and say, well, look, you've fractured your thumb, and their eyes will get big and they say, you tell me I fractured it. In the emergency room, they just told me I broke it. Well, anyway, to orthopedic surgeons, those terms are exactly synonymous. You can say break or fracture, and to an orthopedic surgeon, that means exactly the same thing. And I don't know where people got different about that. The other thing that comes to mind is oftentimes children will hear their parent tell them, say, stop cracking your knuckles. That will give you arthritis. And it doesn't give you arthritis. It's just making a little nitrogen bubble momentarily form in your joint. It crackles just like it would bubble when you shake up a can of soda and then take the pop off of it. How the bubbles of the gas form. So it's an old wives' tale that popping your knuckles cause arthritis. I'm sorry, all you mothers who are telling your children that because you find it annoying. Yes, it can be annoying, but it's not going to cause a problem.
Speaking of fractures and breaks, Dr. Roy, when I was back in high school, I used to play tennis, but there was this moment when my wrist, it just started hurting. And then for 2 months straight, the wrist could not stop hurting, and then it just disappeared. But then later on, let's say, was it a few months or a year later, it started once again. Is that a certain condition, or did I hurt my wrist somehow when I used to fling the racket?
Well, chances are when it began hurting, you were just using it excessively as far as your body was concerned. I mean, you were probably you were a teenager and you were feeling invincible and nothing else ached, and so you felt like you could play tennis all day every day.
That's true.
But here one joint was telling you, say, hey, I need some rest, I need some time off, and I suspect that it went away after 2 months because you probably slowed down or stopped playing tennis and let it rest. And the resiliency of youth and the ability of your tissues to heal is that it healed up. And then was it hurt when it began to hurt again? Were you playing tennis at that point?
No, I was just in class writing, and my wrists, with the motion of the pen, the wrist could just still start hurting again.
Mm-hmm. Were you at that time? Were you doing a lot of writing?
Writing still. So when I start writing, my bones in my hands, they just start aching all the way to my wrist, and then the pain just doesn't go further. It just goes up to the wrist. Yeah,
I mean, maybe you had slept on it wrong, or you may have carried books or groceries or something that you don't recall, you didn't think about at the time as being injurious. But that it was just enough to aggravate your old tennis injury and, begin to make it hurt. but that I think as people get older and have more experience with their bodies, they say, well, man, I remember when I was 35 and I played tennis all weekend at the club, and I couldn't walk for 3 days. Well, people when they get to be 35 or 40, they remember that and say, I'm not going to play tennis all weekend again like that. And so I think it takes a long time for people to get smart about what the limitations of their body are. And it's different for every individual, because there are people who can play tennis all day, every day, and, play it, well into late life and never get sore. And then there are people who can go out and get sore after 3 weeks. And so it's different for each individual.
You mentioned that you have had arthritis patients, and some people find arthritis very scary because we don't know what the symptoms are. You just think that you're having aches on your joints. So how can someone tell that they have arthritis? And is arthritis something that someone should be scared about?
Okay, well, the main kind of arthritis that everybody is susceptible to as they get older is osteoarthritis, or it's called wear and tear arthritis, and it just we just wear out, just like the bearings in the motor in a car or in a wheel would tend to wear out, and the cartilage on our joint gets thinner, and then finally gets ground away to the point where we're no longer sliding nice smooth cartilage on our joint, but we're rubbing bone against bone, and that's what hurt. It'll make the joint swell. It'll make it knobby. If you see older people with knobby joints, finger joints on their hands, as the chances are that's osteoarthritis. Now, the other kind of arthritis that's rather uncommon is rheumatoid arthritis, and that's an autoimmune disease where the person's body, really, their immune system attacks their cartilage in their joints and destroys cartilage. And that is fairly rare to begin with, and then the treatment is so much better these days. The anti-immune drugs that people take to fight this off are incredibly good, and so we don't really see, at least in the United States, we don't see badly crippled people too much anymore with rheumatoid arthritis. But 30 years ago, there were people come into the office, they'd be on walkers because they had rheumatoid arthritis, but their hips and their knees and their ankles were bad, their shoulders were bad, they couldn't get their hands above their head, their elbows were floppy, their fingers and thumbs were deformed, they had trouble opening jars or having trouble holding forks. And fortunately, the medicines are much better now, and that's not very common. But osteoarthritis I don't think we can prevent it. I mean, in some respects, it's a little bit heritable, but it is typically a process. If you're lucky enough to live into your 80s or your 90s, chances are you're going to have a few joints that, are showing some wear and tear before the rest of you are. The good news is that a lot can be done for it. Sometimes for arthritis in the hip or the knee, just using a cane, will suffice. Anti-inflammatory pills help. Sometimes cortisone injections help. There are stronger medicines than that are useful. And then there are a lot of orthopedic, very innovative surgeries that help. So if it got terrible and you had a bad hip and you couldn't even stand up out of a chair or walk up the steps without agonizing, well, then a total hip replacement is rejuvenating. So at the last resort, surgery can be very effective for osteoarthritis. So it's nothing to be afraid of, and that typically most of the aches that we get, just like your wrist ache, is that with a little bit of patience and time, they go away. And, of course, when you get the wrist ache, you say, oh, dear, this is the beginning of arthritis. It's going to get so bad I'm not going to be able to brush my teeth. And we all tend to forecast doom, and typically that's just not the case. And as the decades go on, it does take longer for these self-limiting joint aches to go away, but I can attest to you that most of them do. But if a joint is hurting and you don't have any good explanation for it, and it's going on for a matter of weeks or months, and to the point where it's beginning to interfere with your activities, well, then it's certainly worthwhile to see an orthopedic surgeon and maybe get an x-ray and get some treatment for it. But it's certainly nothing to worry about, and we shouldn't limit our activity because of it.
Speaking of joints, Dr. Mills, why does it hurt a lot when somebody lands on their elbow or falls and lands on their knee? Because it stings a lot when you hit the knees or the elbows more than any part of your body.
Well, I don't think that's the joint. I think it's just that those joints are highly exposed and don't have any padding over it. If we fall backwards and land on our back end, is that we got a lot of muscle back there to pad us before our bone comes close to the sidewalk. But if you fall forward and land on your elbow or land on your knee, is that there's really no padding there, and so it just really hammers that skin and all those nerve endings there on the skin over your elbow or over your knee. They talk to you in a big way.
And why do bones tend to swell up? Let's say you are walking and then you twist your ankle. That part of the ankle will swell for a while and then it will hurt a lot when you're trying to step or walk or stand with that foot. Why does that happen?
Well, because the ligaments that support the joint, the ligaments are tough fibrous tissue that cross from one side of the joint to the other. So they act like hinges. Okay, and typically the hinges are fairly tight and they let your ankle move in certain front to back positions, but not side to side. And the same would be in your finger joints. Is that the two joints that are closest to the tip of your fingers, that they have really strong ligaments along the sides of them, and so they protect from side to side bending, but they really let you have a lot of opening and closing type of bending. So you twist any of these, you twist your ankle or you jam your finger on a basketball, is that these ligaments can get stretched or even torn. And so then there's some bleeding that goes into there and edema forms. And so that's what swells up. And when the ligament's partly torn, is that every time then you go to bend that joint, is that the motion stretches those torn ligaments and you feel pain. But, with time and protection and rest, that heals up.
Doc, we have a lot of bones in our body, and it's hard for an average person to remember all the bones in their body. But what is the most sensitive or most fragile bone in a person's body?
This may surprise you when I say this, but I would just say off the top of my head, our hip. And yes, the femur, the thigh bone, is our largest bone, but that as we gain in years, and we tend to lose calcium in our bones, and then the bones become weaker, and that this is particularly an issue in women after menopause, because no longer are there estrogen hormones protecting the calcium deposits in their bone. And so when the bone begins to lose its density, lose its calcium, well, then it becomes weak. And when it really becomes weak, we call that osteoporosis. And so then older people, when they get in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, is that even just as a minor fall, they may break their hip. Now, we, as orthopedic surgeons, we tend to fix those within just a day or so, and we fix them securely internally with a rod and a big screw that holds the bone securely enough that the patient the next day can be up walking on a walker. And the problem with hip fractures is that, yes, we can fix them, but that just the fact that this breaks the person's normal daytime routine, they may end up spending more time in bed. They're probably taking some pain pills, so they tend to get constipated. They may not be breathing as deeply, and they then put themselves at risk for pneumonia, bladder infections, problems like that. And the statistics are that older people that have a hip fracture, they die within the next year because of, not from the hip fracture, but from some complication, pneumonia or bladder infection, for instance. So 20% die. 50% of people with a hip fracture never recover their pre-injury level of independence, which means that if they live in a two-story house, they may not be able to get upstairs to go to bed. If they are living independently, they may have to go to a rehabilitation facility. They may forever be on a walker. And so it's, if you look at somebody who's 25 or 30, the hip's not the most fragile bone. But I think in terms of looking at the bones through life, is that the consequences of a hip fracture far outweigh the consequences of a fracture of any other bone.
Doc, you have mentioned metal rods and screws on bones. I've seen situations where somebody's leg was fractured really badly and they had to do reconstruction, but inside it he had a metal rod and screws. How does this actually work? And do these metal screws and rods rust with time? Because metal tends to rust with time. Does this happen also to the ones that you put inside human bodies?
Those are good questions. And before about 1920, yes, they would rust. They were iron screws and plates, and that the salt water in the inner bodies would rust them. But then in about 1920 is that stainless steel came along, which is resistant to that. And so now all of the hardware is either made out of stainless steel or titanium. And so that corrosion is not a problem.
And does that make the person feel a little bit heavier? Because once again, it is metal and it is in your body. So will it slow down their activities and they're doing their daily lives? Will it make any noise? The same way you can have a screw and you...
No, when you consider to your total body weight or even to the weight of your limb, is that the weight of the plate and screws does not make an appreciable difference. I've never had somebody tell me that their limb felt heavy because of the hardware inside. Sometimes if it's just below the skin, for instance, just on the border of the forearm that's along the side of the little finger, if that bone breaks over there, that's your ulna. If that bone breaks and it has a plate and screws put on it, is that sometimes people later on will say that they can feel the heads of the screws because there's no padding there between the bone and the skin. And so oftentimes we'll take a plate like that out just so that it's more comfortable for them to rest their forearm on the edge of a table. But in terms of weight, no, that's fortunately not an issue.
And this is something I've always wondered. Really a real thing, like somebody having a fully functional robot hand that is programmable, that you can control, let's say with your head, and it understands whatever you want to do?
Repeat that question. You were breaking up there.
Oh, sorry. Are bionics and trionics, the same things we see in movies, actually real? And do people fracture their bones so much that they need these electronic arms or feet for themselves?
Well, I mean, it would be particularly after amputations, and that for amputations through the leg that is a rather mature discipline in terms of making prosthetics, and probably Olympic athletes with a leg amputation and a prosthesis where they can run as fast or faster as people with two natural feet. But that's a little bit different issue because the foot and leg are basically just for a solid platform and stationary walking. But for instance, to replace the hand is it where you need some motion in the fingers and thumb to be able to grasp and release things and to fasten buttons and turn keys and so forth. That's much more complex. And so that those bionic hands are getting better all the time. And on the news and on YouTube videos, you can see demonstrations of really remarkable electronically controlled bionic hands, but that in the background of a lot of those hands, and you may not see in the video, is three engineers hovering over their computers and have their screwdrivers ready to make adjustments. And so that a lot of those, although they make great visuals for the camera, they aren't really very durable for everyday use, where the patient may accidentally burn the plastic in the stove or catch a finger in the drawer and so forth like that. But that there are new and better techniques coming along all the time with the miniaturization of the electronics and much better batteries and smaller motors and better materials and 3D printing. All these technologies will impact on better and better bionic hands. So if somebody had a terrible injury or had a cancer where their hand had to be amputated, is that there are prostheses that not only look reasonable, they don't look exactly human-like, but across the room you probably wouldn't notice that it was a prosthesis, but they also function to the point where patients can tie their shoes and probably go back to their original work and certainly live independently.
Speaking of technology, Doc, it has aided in medicine for the past years since technology became a thing over the couple of years. And quite recently, scientists have developed a theory from movies that nanites can actually become a real thing and that they can help human body relations. Let's say you have millions of tiny, tiny robotic cells inside of you, and whenever you get a cut, they rush to your arm, fix it. Whenever you have a cancer cell, they rush there, destroy everything. Do you think this can actually be a real thing to you as a doctor, and could it actually help out in medical practices?
Well, in due time, yes. I mean, I think remarkably nature has done this. You say have a cut and cells rush to the area to stop the bleeding and heal the cut. Well, yes, we've been doing that with our own cells for, millions of years. But that with nano technology where they're making little tiny machines on a molecular level and so forth, they are talking about, devising little machines that, could be injected into your blood that would mechanically go attack a cancer cell, for instance. And this is all pretty theoretical. They can make these little machines now, but I think it'll be, I would guess, at least 10 to 20 years before they would be practical in terms of having these nanobots go attack a cancer cell. But, it's certainly something that's interesting to watch on the horizon.
I saw it in a movie and I had to research it because I watched 1, 2, 3 several movies that had the same concept of humans having nanobots inside of them, millions and millions of them, and it cured them, but it turned around as technology does, and it turned on humans and they turned out to be evil people. But if scientists can actually find a way to make these nanobots and have people take them as medical supplements, it could actually help a lot of cases in those terminal diseases that can be cured in any way.
Yes, it's coming, and of course the movies always like to, push the envelope and give us a kind of a science fiction view of the future. But that you look back in science fiction from 100 or 50 years ago, is that a lot of those things that were fiction at the time are, total fact now. So I think it'll be the same with nanotechnology.
And what advice, Doc, would you give somebody who's aiming to become a surgeon or any type of doctor in the future?
Well, there's no rush. When I went to medical school, the Vietnam War was on, and that the U.S. government would defer full-time students through college and then would defer us through medical school as long as we, went straight from college into medical school. So that was a great motivation to, go straight through rather than go to Vietnam. But I think that a lot of us ended up being a little bit young when we finished, and then you hear about people taking gap years now and maybe finish college or take time off during college and then finish college and travel or work for a while. And certainly that's the case in the business industry, is that I don't think anybody goes to a business school directly out of college, but the business schools always want somebody to have some, real world experience working in business before they start into business school. Our son went to medical school. He graduated in 2010, and he was out for 3 years between college and medical school. And I asked him, I said, what percentage of your class, maybe a class of 160 people, I said, what percentage of your class has gone directly from college into medical school? And he thought probably about half. And that I said, well, do your classmates know that you've been out 3 years? And they said, no, I don't tell them. I don't have any reason to tell them that. He said, there's one fellow in our class who's 35 or 36, meaning that he'd been out about 15 years between college and medical school. So I guess the bottom line is don't rush it. You if you take care of yourself, you're going to live a long time, and so you'll have plenty of time to practice medicine, and so to get some life experiences and broaden yourself in terms of the people that you come in contact with and travels and different ideas. You end up going to be a better doctor for it and be sympathetic and empathetic to a much wider group of patients, and you're going to have a richer life yourself. So my advice would be, first of all, don't rush it. And then secondly is that it's important that people who are considering medical school is that they volunteer in a hospital setting or in a doctor's office to shadow people and get a real feeling for what it's like. Some people might just have a theoretical idea with no solid basis to say, well, I want to be a doctor. And that's kind of what happened to me. And unfortunately it turned out fine for me. But that if somebody thought they wanted to be a doctor, then they spent 2 Saturday nights in the emergency room and realized, what chaos was going on down there and the kind of diseases that were taken care of and the people in their distress and so forth, they might feel otherwise. And so, jump into it slowly. And then as you finalize that decision is that, gain some experience in a hospital, volunteering so that you are around sick people and that you know that you feel comfortable around sick people. Not everybody does.
Boy, what advice would you give your younger self?
I would have tried to take some time off between college and medical school. Other than that, I am pretty happy the way things did. A lot of doctors, to my mind, work too hard. I worked hard and I've accomplished a lot and feel like that I've really fulfilled myself at work, but nonetheless, I made sure that I was home for dinner every night with my wife and our son. Now that was dinner at 7 or 7:30. It wasn't dinner at 5:30 or 6, but that I made sure that I fulfilled my role as a father and, greatly enjoyed that. And I guess I must have done a little bit good, the fact that he turned into a hand surgeon too. But that, we had great conversations and, take weekend trips and, longer vacation trips and so forth. And so that, I during my career, I, would see myself as a hand surgeon, but that before and after my career, I see myself as a human being and a father and a husband. And I think in the long term, those are as important, if not more important than one's career choice. So advice to my younger self, I'd just say, just keep an eye on things and make sure that your life's in balance.
That's great. And 47 years is a while. So how has this 47-year-long journey shaped you to the person you are today? How has it shaped you into Dr. Roy Mills?
I feel comfortable talking to anybody about anything. Particularly, I was a general medical officer for 2 years in the Air Force. This was during my orthopedic training. Yeah, so we talked about the training. Is that these days young doctors aren't by necessity spending time in the military. Some doctors do missionary work, for instance, but that there's no obligatory military service in the United States at this point. But that I think it was probably during that time that I learned to listen to everybody and to take their complaints seriously, even though I might be trying to keep a straight face about some of the problems that the patients were telling me. They seemed trivial to me, but they were important enough to them to take time out of their life to come see the doctor. And so I learned to treat those people with respect and to listen to them. And so, I consider myself a good conversationalist outside of medicine, partly because of the experience I've had of listening to people in medicine. I have great respect for the human body and its ability to heal and grow, and that respect just continues to get stronger really every day. The more I read and learn and see and observe my own body, is that, biology is a remarkable activity, and that we should be terribly grateful for a day that we don't have pain, or a day that our skin does heal, or that we can see out of both eyes, or, fix buttons without looking at them. And normally we just take these things for granted, but that it helps life be wonderful.
And if money was never an option to you, Doc, let's say you are the richest person on this planet, what would you do every single day?
I'd give it away. I'd give it away and then do what I've done. To me, that would be a terrible burden. And I've thoroughly enjoyed my career. I told you, enjoyed, collecting insects and watching birds growing up, and I enjoyed everything that I learned about biology, and enjoyed learning about the human body in medical school, and learning how to take care of the musculoskeletal system during residency, and then with my professional career, it's been at the university hospital, and so that I've had medical students and residents and fellows around me to not only inspire me to be a good teacher, but then also enjoyed all the things that they've taught me. And then have a wonderful wife for 47 years and a wonderful child who now has produced grandchildren for us, and that life is good. So yeah, I'd give the money away. I'd give it to Bill Gates and tell him to take good care of it, and I'd keep on doing what I'm doing now.
That's great, Doc, because personally, when I was younger and when I'm all grown up right now, I'm still terrified of reptiles. I'm even more terrified of bugs. But you loved bugs as a kid, and you loved reptiles as a kid. And you loved the bones and the sense of biology. In high school, I was also terrified of biology. I actually took physics. Even though I never liked it that much, I did physics because I could not stand biology in any way. But what people fear the most or hate the most, you actually did it. And it's quite great that you'd still want to continue being the same Dr. Roy despite being the richest person on the planet too.
Yeah.
So how do you vision your life 10 years from now? How do you vision medical life 10 years from now?
Well, I'm healthy. I retired completely from clinical practice in March because of the pandemic lockdown. That I had stopped operating a few years previously. I had electively decided to stop operating because I wanted to stop before somebody told me I should have stopped. And so I was still seeing some office patients, but that had a good partner who I knew was going to take good care of my patients. And so that when we had to stop working in March, then I was spending more time at home, or spending all my time at home, and found that I had plenty to do. And so I told myself in April that I was going to retire, and I told my wife in May, and I told my partner in June, and then have fully retired. And that I think maybe how you found out about me was because of the book that I have written called Bones, Inside and Out. But that was published this past October. And that's been a fun transition project for me, because it's taken a lot of ideas that have been rattling around in my head for years, or really for my whole professional career, and for a chance to write them into a book that not only talks about living bone, that how it grows and heals and what we can do for it, and the history of orthopedic surgery, and like we talked about, first using implants that rusted and now they don't. And then looking at the future of living bone in terms of treatment for osteoporosis, and the consequences and the problems of space travel when we have a manned mission to Mars, and that people are going to be weightless for 2 years. That's going to be a big issue in terms of keeping their bones strong. So that was the first half of the book on living bone, and the second half was really on bone's second life after the original owner's done with it, but that look into bone in terms of recording history and human culture, paleontology, anthropology, popular culture, all of that. And so that was fun. And I'm working now on a proposal to write a book of similar information, but for middle grade children, maybe 5th to 8th grade children, but to teach them about bones and stimulate them into fanning their interest in science, technology, engineering, and math topics. And then also I have in my mind a book to write about muscle, and I'd call that muscle the world's best motor, but that capitalizing on my experience of my career long, not only dealing with skeleton, but also with muscle. So that's going to keep me busy. I like to garden. I try to stay fit jogging or riding my bike. I don't go as far or as fast as I used to. My wife's fit. Prior to the pandemic, we were traveling, and we would enjoy getting back to doing that. But that I plan to stay busy and intellectually engaged, and they say use it or lose it, and that's the case with the calcium in our hip, and it's also I think with your brain cells is that you gotta stay active, and so I'm not worried about having a good time. There were times in the office I'd see a patient who was 75 or 80, and maybe they were lawyers or accountants and psychologists. Those were the characteristic ones, and I'd say, are you still working? Oh yeah, full time. I said, well, are you ever thinking about retirement? And so, oh no, I don't know what I'd do with my time. Well, I feel sorry for those people that they haven't developed, enough, outside interest, and that they have molded their whole life so thoroughly around their career that they don't know what they do with their time. And yeah, it's one thing to love your work, but at some point, you, by one reason or another, you may not be able to, and that you ought to have Plan B. And so I've got Plan B, C, and D ready. So I'm looking forward to the next 10 and 20 years.
That's great, Roy. That you're already envisioning your life. You have embraced that retirement right now, but you have worked for 47 years and you've already done such amazing work. So you retiring is a reward to you, and I know other patients are grateful and they are happy that finally my doctor Roy Mills is finally taking some time out for himself to explore more, to write and encourage other people to join this profession, and that's amazing. But if you were in my shoes right now, what questions would you have asked yourself that I possibly didn't?
You've been very thorough. This has been very, very interesting, and I hope it'll give your listeners some insights from a retiring doctor in Los Angeles about maybe how to plan your life. One privilege that I had, and I really took advantage of it, and I miss it now, is talking to my patients. And that a lot of times these days in the United States it's rush, 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 and I hear people say that, well, the doctor hardly saw me. They came in and looked at the chart and talked to me for 3 minutes and scribbled a prescription and ran out. Well, I didn't start my practice like that, and I certainly wasn't going to end it like that. And so I just enjoy talking to patients, and as we talked about earlier, I find out a little bit about them and what makes them tick, and what their children are doing or what kind of hobbies they have. But I bring this up now because I particularly enjoyed talking to patients who are older than I am, because they're a fountain of knowledge in terms of staying healthy, how they travel, where they travel, what restaurants they like, what books they're reading, if they're not as physically fit as they were 10 years ago, how they're managing that. And so that they may have thought that they were coming to see me to to get some information from me, but that before they left, I was making sure that I had good information from them about how to plan my life. And one of the things that people have told me time and time again, and it goes to this about having things to do in retirement, is that the advice is to retire to something, not retire from something. I think the people who are unhappy in retirement is that they maybe were forced to retire when they were 65, or maybe a medical condition forced them to retire, and so they retired from something, but they didn't have anything to do, and so they just get bored and maybe start eating or drinking and die 6 months later, out of boredom. And that so I would encourage everybody to have well-developed activities and family and hobbies or volunteer work, so that when you step away from your main line of work, that you still have a fulfilling life as a human being, and that there are people who appreciate you and need you and give you some challenges both physically and mentally to keep yourself fit.
It's also been a thrill talking to you, Roy. And if our listeners would like to read more about your book or would like to purchase your book, where can they find it?
Well, the easiest way is to go to my blog, which is aboutbone.com. And I blog in there about bone, and then the information about my book is there too. But the book is available online through all the major booksellers. The name is Bones, Inside and Out, Roy A. Meals, M-E-A-L-S, M-D. So at least have a look at the blog, and if you like the idea of the blog, I try to be educational but also a little bit humorous. I think learning should be fun, and so if you like the blog, go ahead and subscribe to it, and then every 2 or 3 weeks when I post a new article, I'll send you a short email about the new blog post coming up. But that on the blog is also information about the book, and also there's a contact link, and so if you have a question about something we've talked about tonight, or you have some question about the blog or the book, contact me and I'll get back to you. I can't answer your medical questions. You have to go to your doctor to do that. But if you have some general question about the bone, I'd love to be in touch with any of your listeners. Yeah.
I'll make sure that they reach out to you and that they read the blog and they subscribe, and I'm sure that they'll learn a lot from both the blog and today's episode, because you have talked a lot about questions that I'm sure they had at the top of their mind but were too afraid to ask, because as patients, sometimes we can have questions that might seem odd to the doctor, and we just sit there in the hospital like, I'm not going to ask because he might think that I'm weird. But I'm pretty sure most of the answers at least have been answered today, and if they have more, they can reach out to you so that you can answer the questions.
No, the only bad question is the one that is not asked. So
exactly.
so nothing's too weird. Bring them on. I'm ready.
But anyway, thank you so much for being part of 12 Days of Christmas here on the podcast.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed talking to you. Yeah.
I did too, and happy holidays to you and your family.
Same to you. Thank you. Take care.
Well, we have come to yet another amazing interview, guys. If you'd like to get a hold of his book, Bone Inside and Out, the link will be in the description down below. And also, please remember to leave a review or comment for us here or on my Instagram or Twitter or even on our Facebook page how you feel about this season's episode. And I know I'm just trying to figure things out, but I think I'm doing okay, right? I think I am. But anyways, I hope you have an amazing day or night depending on what time zone you are. And today is the winter solstice, so check out outside your window, outside your balcony at night, look at the stars, because the heavens has graced us with the Christmas star, which is actually the conjunction of Jupiter and the planet Saturn. But it's quite magical when you see it, because we don't see the planet, we see it as a shining Christmas star, the same one that appeared the day Jesus was born. And it appeared 20 years ago, and if you miss it today, you have another chance to see it 20 years later. That is 2040. I'm not even sure how many of you outside will be there, but I hope we all will. So, because I'm pretty sure from wherever I am from, I'm not in the northern hemisphere, I can't see it. So please send a pic to me, or a video, or a link where I can watch the star or see the pictures, because I love astronomy. But anyways, as this day is magical, I hope yours is too. Till we meet again here on Care Life Podcast. Bye!